But now it's time to talk to the Foreign Secretary, who will lay out plans to tackle channel crossings today in a speech later this morning, introducing what the government says is a world-first sanctions regime targeting the finances of people smuggling gangs, making it harder for them to profit from the trade. Well, as I said, we are able to speak now to the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who I'm delighted to say is here with us in studio. A very good morning to you, Foreign Secretary.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us on this. And you're going to be outlining more about these plans later this morning. But this new legislation is coming from you, from your department, which is a change, not from the Home Secretary. Talk us through the nuance there and what's groundbreaking about it in your eyes.
Well, many of your viewers will, when they think about how we go after organised criminal gangs that are smuggling people into our country and across the channels, do think about the Home Office. But the truth is the Foreign Office does play a role. When we're returning people to their countries because they have no right to be here, that's gone up 20%. 13,500 people returned. It's Foreign Office officials often doing that. When we're working with the national crime agencies in countries where people are passing through to try and deter them, work with those countries to keep them there, it's often diplomats at the centre of that. And here, I want to use sanctions now to go after particularly the supply chains and the routes that people are doing. I saw at the National Crime Agency some of the boats, the flimsy rubber boats that are being made, organised, shipped, often through countries like Germany, but coming from China through Turkey. I want to go after those who build the engines. They're often abroad. They're in places like China. Just as I've gone after oligarchs, just as I've gone after kleptocrats, just as I've dealt with the Russian shadow fleet and denied Putin £400 billion in his economy, I want to go after those who are smuggling people and the supply chains that they rely on.
And what powers will the new legislation grant you and the government? I mean, clearly sanctioning criminals is something that happens already. Can you sanction the states, the nations and their leaders who might inadvertently or intentionally be harbouring these criminals?
Well, there may well be, sadly, leaders in countries who are behind this. Those who traffic don't just traffic people, they traffic drugs and they traffic guns and equipment as well, and we do know that. That's sometimes involved politicians in different states. You can freeze their bank accounts. You can deploy travel bans. You combine with other partners, particularly European allies, the United States and others. This is the first set of designations using migration specifically. We have been able to do things using human rights designations in the past, using other designations in the past. But here we're targeting migration, the first in the world to do it, and I suspect others will follow. It's not the whole solution. Of course, it's not the whole solution, but I think it can be a significant part of the solution, particularly for the value and supply chains that people are using as a means to get people across borders.
Do you imagine that it might be possible, if you're provided the sufficient level of evidence of wrongdoing, that you'll have to impose sanctions on individuals, possibly senior individuals, in countries geographically very close to us? We know these boats set off from France in large part. Is it plausible that these powers will be used on French people?
When we look at the intelligence picture, what we see is engines that are being made in countries like China. What we see are transshipment routes that are coming through places like Turkey. And what we see are the familiar areas in the Mediterranean, in the Sahel and North Africa, particularly the Horn of Africa. Germany is changing its legislation to bear down on some of the problems that we've identified, working alongside them. And it's individuals upstream in those countries that we'll be able to target with this new sanctions designation.
I wanted to move on to some of the comments we've seen in recent days by the President-elect, Donald Trump, towards Greenland, towards Panama Canal. I'm sure you've seen them. Do you think that's classic Donald Trump?
Yes, I do think it's classic.
It's not something that worries you?
It's classic Donald Trump. Look, I think that what sits behind Donald Trump is he's just won an election. 77 million people voted for him, up in nearly all classifications, including, by the way, African Americans and Latinos. He came in very clearly saying he was going to work for working people. And he sees Americans' national economic security as centering that. That is why he's raising issues in relation to the Panama Canal and I suspect to Greenland. He always amplifies that and does it at its most as its strongest intensity, but sitting behind that are actually quite serious national security and economic issues.
Your French counterpart, and indeed the German Chancellor, felt his comments in recent days were enough to speak out against them. Obviously, there's a difference between comments, whilst you're still president-elect, and actions, but are we seeing a difference in approach there between you and your government and Germany and France, that you'll wait to see if he crosses a line physically rather than talks about crossing a line?
I suspect the difference in Germany is that they're fighting an election. We're not in an election season here, we fought an election. What sits behind those comments are issues of national security. The Panama Canal, he's raised issues around China's influence. I think those are legitimate issues, actually. But of course, we raised those sorts of issues here in the UK. The issues around Greenland have been raised before. In the end, that is up to the people of Greenland and their own self-determination. And there is a discussion within Greenland about those very same issues.
But he was asked in one of the press conferences, would you rule out using military or economic force to seize either of them? And he said, no, he wouldn't rule those two things.
Well, that's the amplification of the intensity of the rhetoric. But let's be clear, no NATO countries have gone to war since the establishment of NATO, and I don't envisage that.
So the rhetoric, though, in the meantime, you wouldn't condemn. Obviously, the actions you would, if it got to that.
I'm not in the business of condemning our closest ally. I am in the business of interpreting what sits behind this. And there are some very serious national economic security issues. That's the basis on which Donald Trump has won his election. And let me just say, he is saying in America that his number one issue is growth and his second issue is migration. Guess what? We're saying the same thing here in the UK under our government. So we can find common cause on these issues.
Very, very interesting, Foreign Secretary. So he's also said that there'll be all hell to pay if hostages aren't released by the 20th of January, Inauguration Day, by Hamas. Do you think that this is a good time to reinforce the lines for both sides on the Palestine, Israel-Gaza war?
Well, look, I think that we are inching closer to that hostage deal that gets us a ceasefire. And I think that the issues now that are stopping us getting there come down to whether it is just a deal or whether it is in fact a ceasefire. And it's our desire in this country that we do see an end to this conflict and we get to a negotiated solution going forward. And obviously there are issues about which hostages get released. And let me just mention Emily Damari, who was on a list that was published a few days ago. She is the UK citizen, and particularly this is an issue that the UK government continues to raise, both with the Israelis, but also with those who are negotiating with Hamas, and I'm thinking here of the Qataris and the Egyptians, and I raised this with my Qatari counterpart just a few days ago.
There's lots of issues you'll have to deal with President Trump, as we've already been alluding to. I wonder whether the one that you feel the most pressure on, that's most important, is to try and convince the incoming administration to support Ukraine as much as the outgoing administration has. I mean, there's history here of Britain in particular needing to convince America of the importance of the European cause, both through history, but recently with this conflict in particular. Are you feeling the pressure? That falls on you more than anybody else.
Well, look, I had dinner with Donald Trump back in September. I spent 3 hours with Donald Trump, and of course we talked about Ukraine. The Secretary General of NATO has been to Mar-a-Lago to discuss Ukraine. I was with Prime Minister Meloni in Brussels just before Christmas discussing Ukraine, and I saw that she was at Mar-a-Lago and she would have been raising the issue of Ukraine with him. I'm absolutely clear. Donald Trump is an individual who wants a deal, but he's also an individual who sees himself as a winner and not a loser. And I don't see, at the moment, we don't see in the intelligence any sense at all that Putin is ready to seriously negotiate. Zelensky himself says he does see, in terms of peace through strength, the ability of Donald Trump to do this over the coming months. We will be in intense conversation with the new administration following the 20th of January. All of us want to bring this war to an end, but European security and standing up to Putin's imperialism and ensuring he does not come back for more is essential. That's in our interests here in the UK, but it's also in the interests of our friends and allies in North America.
Very quickly, I know we're out of time. Chagos Islands, is there any chance that we will renege on the deal that you'd agreed in its entirety and keep the Chagos Islands, or not?
Well, look, this is a good deal, and that is why it was a deal that the Pentagon, the White House, the State Department said was a good deal. It's why the other superpower in the region, India, said it was a good deal. The only superpower that said it's not a good deal is China. We're discussing this with the new government in Mauritius, and let us see where we get to. But I have to say, this is the deal on the table to the new government. As they get into the detail, and obviously it's taken them some time to get into the detail, they're only 2 months in office, they will recognise that this is a good deal for them.
Zero chance from our side that you keep them in full, the
Sorry?
islands? Zero chance from our side that you keep them in full, the islands?
No, it's a negotiation. We're now at about our 12th or 13th round in negotiation. I think it's a good deal, but negotiation takes two sides to get us there.
Foreign Secretary, I know we're over the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great to chat this morning. And begrudging congratulations to Tottenham Hotspur.
It was great last night. Wonderful.
Just very disappointing indeed. Great to see you.